Hey guys, this is Mike Parsley with the TWRA. We're out here on Old Hickory Lake and we're in the boat with my friend Ian Huey. Of course, he runs Old Hickory Guide Service. And today we're going to teach you about ledge fishing. When we talk about ledges, we're talking about the old river channels that most of our TVA lakes still have. So we're going to show you what you're looking for on the map when you're just sitting at home. And then we're going to take you out on the water. We're going to show you what you're looking for on your graph and the topo lines on your map when you're in the boat. And then we're going to show you what the fish that you're looking for, what they actually look like on the graph. And so we'll show you the difference between white bass, and we'll show you how a bass sets up on a ledge drop and how white bass set up on the ledge. And then we're going to show you how to catch a couple of them. We're going to catch quite a few white bass and a couple largemouth here on Old Hickory. And we'll also show you what baits that you're going to want to throw when you get out here on the ledge. We'll show you what you're looking for, and then we'll show you how to catch them.
So what we're speaking about when we say ledge fishing, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find these bass literally right on the edge of that. So as that river ledge falls off into this deeper water, where we want to actually find those bass is right up on the high side. So if you can imagine like a hill or a ridge up on the bank, that's exactly what it is. It's just literally a ridge that comes off into this deep channel. Now, we know that there's miles and miles and miles of river ledges. What we're looking for are those little bitty variations in it. So we look right here, we've got a bunch of straight river ledge. I'm not going to say that there's no bass up here. A higher percentage area in something that we're wanting to look for is a break. So something like this right here. So this is an old ditch running into the river channel. So what this was a creek originally that dumped right into that river channel. What that makes is, you hear a lot of guys call it a saddle or a gut. What this makes is it's high, and then it's low, just like on a horse saddle. What that does is that actually provides those bass with a current break. So our current's coming down just like this. Those bass can hide right in here, get out of that current, while the current actually brings them not only oxygenated water, cooler water, and it's actually going to bring them their food. So they'll actually sit right up here on this high side. That current's going to crash in from this direction right here. It's going to hit that high side, and it's actually going to roll that current over their heads where they're not having to work to stay in that current to eat. So they're going to be, generally speaking, they're going to be right here on these edges of these high spots, keeping out of that current, letting the current bring them their food, and it's a whole lot more favorable water conditions for them. So that's actually what we're looking for. When we're trying to break a map down, this is the exact kind of things that I'm looking for, are those little bitty differences. Open it up, Mike.
I see him down there.
There he is.
There you go. It's white.
See, they were over here earlier. Pushed them off. Most of these fish over the last week or so, they've pulled up off the bank, and what they're doing now is they're on these creek and river channel ledges, looking for that cooler, more oxygenated water. These aren't necessarily largemouth, but they are white bass, or stripe as some people call them. And oftentimes out here on these ledges, they're actually going to group up together. They're going to be mixed in together. Obviously their bait is the exact same. They're looking for those shad out here. Shad are looking for the cooler water as well. So that's kind of the deal. And like I said, oftentimes you'll catch a bunch of white bass in the middle of a bunch of largemouth as well. And with these white bass, they're a lot of fun because they can literally be every single
There's
cast.
one, Ian.
Green fish.
I think so. Yeah.
Nice white.
It is. It is.
Nice in there. But they can be a lot of fun. As you can see, it's nearly every single cast right here. You know, we're catching them on a deep diving crankbait. 6XDs in particular, and color generally doesn't matter. I hear a lot of talk about this color, that color, with a little bit of this or that. Mike's got another one, look like.
I don't think I've win a cast without getting one.
The best thing about these white bass is they're an absolute ball to catch. They're also excellent table fare. Oh God, that one's something right at the boat. Feels a little better. There you go. See them all following him up. That right there is excellent table fare. It's a fish you don't necessarily hear a lot about eating wise, but in fact I ate them last night again and they are absolutely delicious. Oh, all right, so here we've got a channel coming out of a little bay here, and it's meeting the river channel right here. Notice where the majority of my waypoints are. This is where we're going to be primarily catching fish at. The current is coming from this direction, and it's crashing right in here into that little bitty point right there. Notice it's not on the big obvious point necessarily, but this is out in that current a little bit more, which is going to hold the fish. Obviously they're going to have more bait coming through to eat, and cleaner moving water. So as I'm graphing, remember the blue is the deeper water with the green being the shallower. I want to try to ride that edge. You absolutely can graph back and forth this direction, but you're not going to cover nearly as much water as you can going right down that edge. Now, here's my side imaging here. A nice steady speed right here is absolutely critical. And notice here we're coming up the break. So we're coming up. Okay, so saw a couple fish there, a couple little dots. We can see over here all these big shadows. Those big shadows on the edge like that, that's actually telling me that's a large drop off. If you can think of your sonar literally like the sun, anything that it can't touch. So if you've got a building, a car, anything in the way of the sun, obviously you're going to cast a shadow. It's the exact same way over here to the side. That sonar, so our boat's dead middle right here, sonar's shooting out to the sides, that's a break. That's going to drop off very, very sharp. So if you can imagine that beam coming over, it's going to keep traveling. It's not going to go down, just like we have right here. It's just traveling out. That's going to be a drop, a very hard drop, casting a shadow, and there's a fish right there. He's sitting right, actually probably two right there. That's a bass sitting right on that drop, that little bitty dot. That's why it's so important to use your side imaging, because you're going to see things like that, whereas on down imaging, you're not necessarily going to pick up on little variances like that. Is down here at that 14.5 mark where it's a good solid yellow line, that's going to be our bottom. All this up here is fish, and primarily white bass right here. This is a situation where you can actually catch them vertically using like a little spoon, 3/8 ounce spoon, just silver in color, nothing really special about it, but it mimics a shad, a dying shad, just about as good as anything, and white bass absolutely can't stand it dropping right in front of their face. And it's very easy to fish. What literally all we're doing is we're going to make a cast out. We're going to let it go all the way to the bottom. Slack line. All right, we're on the bottom there, and all we're doing is just lifting our rod tip. What we're doing is we're bringing that spoon up off the bottom and then letting it go back down on just a little bit of slack line, and it literally looks like a shad that's been hit and is dying. Well, there's no easier prey for a bass or a white bass than a dying shad. And you can't hardly honestly fish these wrong. You can reel them, you can jig them vertically, you can cast them out, ripping it up off the bottom, and they're cheap. So these bass are going to be back in these bays in the springtime spawning. Once the water warms up, they get done doing their deal, they're going to work their way out. This is their first spot for all these little bitty pockets. So anything in front of a creek, anything in front of a bunch of pockets, that's going to be ultra high percentage. Then you add in a saddle like this, and you've got exactly what you're looking for. Oh, there he is.
Good.
That may be a bass. He's coming up. Don't turn. Nope. White. Look at the blue, man. Some of them will have like a blue hue on their fins.
Yeah.
All right, guys and girls, we're back here at the ramp. Caught a lot of fish today, and we want to go over a couple baits. Just some general baits that are very good on the ledges. First bait we're going to talk about is a deep diving crankbait. This one in particular is a 6XD, very common crankbait. Got a big wide lip on it, got a very, very hard wobble. This bait generally is going to run 16, 17 foot on a long cast. And probably the biggest thing and the most common mistake I find with people throwing these is that they don't crank them hard enough. Right after we make that cast, we're on that reel ultra quick, and we're cranking very, very hard. We're cranking as hard as we can, and what we're actually doing is we're getting a reaction bite. So that bass is hanging down there, we're gonna crank this bait down, and as it's hitting the bottom, very, very critical, we must hit that bottom. This bait is digging, and it's deflecting left and right. Digging, back and forth. It's got a very erratic roll to it, and that is absolutely key to generating those bites. It's very, very important anytime that we're throwing a crankbait, and really in particular a big crankbait like this, that we're making bottom contact. Very, very important. Now your rod and reel set up on a big crankbait is probably more important than any other crankbait that we're actually going to throw. What we want is we want a long rod. This is a Lew's 711 deep cranking rod. It's a medium heavy rod. It's got good backbone right here for a long cast, but it's got enough tip up there where it allows that bait to do what it needs to do in the bottom. And more importantly, once the bait gets bit, it's going to actually absorb a lot of that shock. It's not going to put direct pressure on those hooks. It's going to let that fish do whatever he needs to do without tossing your hooks. Another great bait that is highly productive on the river ledges in the summertime is just your 5-inch swim bait. I've got it on a 1/2 ounce head. Generally that's plenty of weight for any depth down to about 15 foot of water. What we're gonna do is we're gonna cast this bait out, literally let it go to the bottom. Once we're on the bottom, barely turn that reel handle. Key with this bait is that we maintain bottom contact throughout. Now, on our hook sets, very important when we get bit that we don't automatically jerk it. This is more of a pull hook set, so we're reeling, we get bit, we're just gonna lean right into him, almost like we do with a Carolina rig or something. You'll miss a lot of bass if we're just snatching right at the bite. So we're gonna cast out, let it go to the bottom, and just barely turn your reel handle over. All right, so the next bait we're gonna talk about is a 10-inch worm. Initially, when those bass get out on the ledges after the spawn, trying to recoup, trying to eat as much as they can, trying to regain their strength. So 10-inch worm is a great option, super easy to fish. What I've got here is 10 or 12-inch worm, I don't necessarily recall. I've got a bead just after my hook, and then I've got a 1/2 ounce bullet weight. Here again, like with most of our baits that we're ledge fishing with, bottom contact is absolutely key. You can vary your weight size, you know, from this all the way up to a 1 ounce down to a quarter. As long as we're maintaining bottom contact, we're doing what we need to do. I've got this rig, Texas style, obviously you can Carolina rig it. There's a bunch of different ways that you can rig it. This is probably the most simple and effective right as those bass get out on the ledges. Your hook is key. When we're throwing a great big bait like this, we want a bigger hook. So this is a 5/0 offset hook. Find them anywhere. Our next bait we will talk about is a bait that you don't see thrown very often, but this is going to be a drop shot. Okay, generally when we speak of a drop shot, everybody automatically assumes clear water, ultra deep, ultra clear water. That's not at all the truth. This out on the ledges, and really in particular a little bit later after these bass have kind of been messed with, they've been caught a few times, they've kind of been bumped around, they're going to get a little bit finicky, and they're going to kind of want to move around. They're going to want a little bit more subtle bait. So what we've got here is we've got a drop shot weight here at the bottom. 3/8 ounce is a really good weight. Came up to a 1/0 drop shot hook, open hook, and all I've done is I've taken that worm and rigged him right there in the middle. Put him right there in the middle. Now that's called wacky style. That is a great way to rig them as well as nose hook them, where we're just literally going right on the nose of the bait. Something like that right there. And after you cast, obviously we're going to go to the bottom just like with all of our other baits. And as we drag that along, our weight is down here on the bottom and our bait is absolutely weightless. So as we're dragging, that bait's just easing through the water. Super, super natural. Awesome, awesome presentation to show these a little bit more highly pressured fish. So this is the last bait we want to go over today. This is a football head jig. The reason we call this football head is the head of the jig actually looks like a football. That's actually got a purpose to it, and what that does is that allows that bait to crawl over the rocks, generally without getting hung down in the creases and crevices of the rock. So that's very important out on these river ledges, because obviously we're always going to be on that hard bottom, and as this bait's coming through, that wider head allows it to keep on top of the rock rather than going down in it. We've got a general crawl trailer. You know, I don't get ultra picky about my trailers. Anything that's kind of resembling a crawl, something like that, absolutely will work fine. Weights vary quite a bit on these. They make them all the way up into about an ounce, ounce and a quarter, all the way down to a quarter, 3/8 ounce weight. So a couple different ways we can fish a jig, throw it out and just simply drag it. A little bit later on in the season, when they get a little bit more finicky, we're going to do a little bit more hopping. Make that jig come up off the bottom, raising your rod tip, and generally we're going to get that bite as it's coming down. It's more of a reaction bite. All right, so those are just a couple baits that we're typically going to throw out here on these ledges. Anywhere from late May into June and July, that's absolutely where you need to be. You're always going to have a few fish on the bank, but 90% of your fish this time of year, if you're on the bank, they're going to be behind you. So use the little tips that we've given you today. Get out on the river ledges and give it a shot. I think you'll have a lot of fun doing it.